Hello, I'm going to speak a little bit today about people pleasing. It's something I've touched on before, but I think there's quite a lot to look at here. And it seems that more and more occurs to me because it's something that's quite pertinent here too. Particularly focusing on the way in which it looks like people pleasing keeps us safe. And when I say keeps us safe, I'm talking about the identity or the psychological self, or what I sometimes might refer to as little me. So that's the idea of me, the idea of who I am, which has been acquired since childhood, perhaps repeated back to us. It's a script or a narrative that we hold on to and hold quite dearly and close to our hearts, understandably. So it might be that in childhood, it was a mechanism to keep the identity safe and that it served a purpose then. Perhaps we had caregivers or more authority figures around us, and it felt like if we caused some kind of disapproval or if our behaviour wasn't in accordance with what they expected or wanted, it might have internalized and become a sense of shame or a pattern that required validation in order to stay safe. And it might be that that behavior from the adult or parent was just unconscious, or maybe they weren't aware of it, or maybe it wasn't intended so. But what has happened here is the important bit. It's really important to come back to the fact that that was a behavioural loop that served a purpose at that time in life, but perhaps we've carried it through our lives and now it feels a little bit redundant, but we're still doing it, or it's still happening, because there is actually no controlling me that is causing that behaviour. It's a behavioural pattern that's become embedded in the psyche and repeated over and over. And it particularly comes up in relationships or dynamics where perhaps there is somebody who comes into our world who triggers that sense of feeling unsafe. Perhaps they appear to us as having quite a dominant personality or being quite strong-willed, and there's fear here about not pleasing that person. As long as everything is okay, the identity feels safe, or so it appears to the story self. As soon as it seems like the identity is not behaving in an acceptable way or is causing some kind of disapproval from over there, it can feel very uncomfortable here. We've all had that moment where we'd be having what can look like a fairly innocuous conversation with somebody, but then a comment has been taken right there and it hurts so much, and suddenly everything comes inward. All of our energy seems to completely take over and be concentrated on that sense of me feeling unsafe and insecure. And understandably, the story self, or little me, is clamouring hard in order to regain that apparent sense of security. And it looks in that moment like the best way to do that is to switch the behaviour to make it pleasing to the other, or to at least secure some kind of approval in that moment. That looks like safe behaviour to the identity. But really, can we see how that creates a massive amount of dissonance internally? And when I say dissonance, I mean that jarring, that sense of there's a deep knowing within of what is true and what feels like integrity here. And yet the behaviour that's playing out is not aligned with that, because it's all about going over there, making that okay in order to make this okay. And it looks on the surface like that's perfectly sensible thing to do. But actually, the more it jars here, the more we flap about and clamour and try and regain security, we're ill at ease, we feel precarious, we feel fragile. And it's a constant state of vigilance all the time. The psyche is looking around and constantly looking at what's looking dodgy, what needs securing. But maybe there's another way. Maybe healing comes in feeling those really intense feelings, because they will be activated or triggered. We talk about triggering a lot nowadays in society. And that's the thing that creates that sense of ill at ease, discomfort, not feeling safe inside. But below that, below the conditioning that feels very real in the moment, is an expansiveness that is so beautiful that can hold all of that. So instead, there's a trusting in that, and there's a sitting in the discomfort, and there's a realization that that story self is no longer who we are. It never was who we are, we just thought it was. And actually there might be a different position to take, and that is to hold still, to breathe into it, to allow the feelings, and to go back to this space of integrity. And from that space, there is just a knowing of what is the appropriate behaviour, what makes sense in that moment that keeps us centred. And so instead of constantly clamouring to appease other people, there's a different way, and that is to come from here, because actually it's only ever from here that perception is created. And when there is anchoring here, who knows how the others might show up? That might completely change. It's not our job, nor is it our responsibility to be responsible for how the other shows up or what's going on in their inner world, because their inner world is just like ours. It's lots of conditioned behaviour, it's lots of beliefs that look real. So instead of going over there to try and manipulate and control that, we're coming back here to the stillness, and we're going to come back to the integrity and the centeredness, and that is the healing space. Lots of love.